After 10 years together, my husband Brian and I decided to call it quits. The marriage had been wonderful at first, like most couples during their honeymoon phase, but the time had taken its toll on our marriage. Brian worked long hours, trying with everything he had to become one of the partners at the big fancy law firm he started working at right out of law school. Because I'm an author, I was able to work from home. At first, I didn't mind it much. The days were lonely, yes, but it allowed me to get a lot of words written with Brian away. I had our dog Buster to keep me company, and he would always come put his head on my lap when he knew I was feeling blue. Unfortunately, Brian's 10-hour days turned into 15-hour days, and then he started sleeping at the office. I had almost convinced myself that he wasn't having an affair with his assistant, but after catching them together one evening with a surprise visit, I knew our marriage was over. For the first time in over 10 years, I was going to be living in a place by myself. I was used to being alone, but this task of finding my own place seemed a bit more daunting. I decided I needed to get out of the city and find a place further away. I started looking for a rental property in the Mountain Air Gazette. I was hoping to find a little cottage with a wraparound porch so that I could sit outside and write during the warmer months. As luck would have it, I found one. The property management's website had indicated that the property was vacant, so I decided to do a quick drive up to the house and look around. The house was surrounded by lush forest, and the view from the porch was breathtaking. Luckily enough, it appeared that I would only have one neighbor down the hill. I called on a Sunday, and by Tuesday the place was mine. It was bittersweet packing up the things that Brian and I had shared over the years. Brian was gracious while we were splitting up our things and also let me keep Buster. For a woman living alone in the mountains, Buster was going to be my constant companion and protector. The moving truck showed up bright and early Wednesday morning. I had already packed up my SUV the night before, so once the movers were done loading, we headed to my new home. After a long day of moving all my belongings, I was very ready for a shower and to go to bed. I would start to unpack in the morning and take Buster for a walk around the area to get myself more acquainted. I stood in my living room and took in the silence. The city was nothing like the solitude the mountains had to offer. The next morning, I put on a pot of coffee and scrambled up some eggs and toast. I wanted to get Buster out and about before it got too hot outside. We walked down my long driveway, out to the dirt road, and started down the hill. My neighbor's house started coming into view. Seemed unassuming to me. The property was well maintained and clean. Buster and I continued to the bottom of the hill, and then back up. I realized how out of shape I was by the way my legs were burning on the way back up. We were just about to get back to my front door when I heard someone calling out to me.
"Howdy, old neighbor,"
a man's voice said behind me. I spun around to see a burly-looking man heading in my direction with what appeared to be a pie in his hands. His wife must have sent him over here to welcome me to the area. Buster didn't seem startled by the man, so I figured he was okay.
"You must be the new neighbor. You getting settled in all right?"
he said. "Oh, yes. Just moved in yesterday. I apologize if we caused any issues for you. I'm Julie, by the way. Nice to meet you."
"Oh, you didn't cause me any issues. Pleasant to meet you. Name's Robert. I thought you could use a little something to settle into your new home, so I brought you a pie as a welcoming gift. It's apple. I hope you don't mind."
"Oh, thank you. I can't say that I've ever had a neighbor bring me pie before. Nice to meet you, Robert."
"Well, I'm right down the road if you ever need anything. I have a stew in the slow cooker, so if you need a break later and want a hot meal, you are more than welcome to join me for dinner."
Was this guy hitting on me? If he was, I couldn't tell. I was completely out of practice with this sort of thing. Maybe people were just friendlier in the city. "Oh, thank you for the invitation. I'll think about it. Well, I need to be going. Have a good day." We said our awkward goodbyes, and I headed into the house. With my looming deadline, I still needed to get some things unpacked before I went back to work. As I started to unpack my dishes, I still had the encounter with my neighbor heavy on my mind. Why did he want to invite a complete stranger to dinner so soon? I went to my living room window that overlooked Robert's house. Everything seemed completely normal. Maybe I was just letting this move and the divorce get the better of my emotions. By the evening, I had most of my kitchen unpacked. I made myself a little dinner, fed Buster, and then headed to bed. The past few days had been emotional and exhausting. I was in desperate need of a settled home and a good night's sleep. The following afternoon, I looked down at my phone to see my soon-to-be ex-husband's number on the caller ID. What could he possibly want at this point? I didn't know. Hadn't he done enough damage already? I knew better not to answer it, but I did anyways. And after a very heated argument, I hung up the phone disgusted and decided that maybe dinner with my new neighbor wasn't such a bad thing after all. It was just about 4:30, so I decided to head down the hill and see if the dinner invite was still on the table. Noticeably, the hill was a bit steeper than I remembered as I started my descent to Robert's house. Getting to his driveway, I smelled the most magical smell wafting out of his kitchen window. I took a guess that it was some sort of roast, and I was willing to bet he had enough for 2. Had I gotten lucky 2 days in a row? Nervous, I walked up to the door and knocked lightly. I don't know why I was so nervous. I'm sure Robert would be a great host and dinner company. He must have heard my footsteps as I walked up to the door, because he opened the door as soon as I knocked.
Howdy, neighbor. Looks like you have decided to take me up on my dinner offer. I'm happy to have you. Please, come in.
Robert had a wonderful home filled with pictures of what appeared to be his family. So many happy memories filled the walls, and I could only imagine all the fun times they'd had together.
Dinner's just about done. Are you hungry?
He asked. Oh yes, I could really go for a home-cooked meal right about now. Junk food is really starting to get old. While Robert was finishing things up in the kitchen, I decided to take a look around. I admired the beautiful furniture he had in his home. Most of it was hardwood that undoubtedly had several hours of craftsmanship put into each piece. I ran my hands over the heavy wood furniture in the living room as I walked up to the wall of portraits. There were your typical family photos. Some were done in portrait studios, and the others were candid photos taken at different events. The more I looked, the more I wondered where Robert was. I didn't see him in any of the photos, and I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but I swear the family didn't even look like they could be related to him. Is this your family? I asked.
Yes. Most of those are of my son, his wife, and their 2 children.
You must be camera shy. I don't see you in any of the pictures, I joked. Robert didn't say a word. Odd. He must not be a jokey joke kind of guy.
Dinner is ready to dish up. I hope you like roast carrots and potatoes.
Sounds great, I said. We dished up and sat down for dinner. All seemed normal until I took the first bite of my roast. Something was definitely off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. What kind of meat did he use? I was expecting beef, but this tasted a bit more gamey. Elk, perhaps? As to not arouse suspicions, I decided to work on my carrots and potatoes. Even with moving on from the meat, I couldn't get the weird taste out of my mouth. What the heck was that?
Not like in your dinner,
Robert asked. What kind of meat is this? I don't believe I've had something like this before.
You know, it truly gets lonely up in these parts. You're the first neighbor I have had since I came here. I find that dinner company is hard to come by, and seems to be even harder to please than I thought. I truly wanted to get to know you, but it seems you're smarter than the last family I had dinner with.
I'm so sorry if I offended you in any way.
Julie, you're a smart woman, so I can't have you leaving. You see, those people on the wall used to live here before I showed up. They were so kind to let me in, but little did they know that they would not be staying much longer. What a perfect location to hide out and so much food in one place.
I don't understand, I said, nervously trying to figure out what was happening. My gut was screaming at me to get up and get out of that house as fast as I could, but I was frozen by fear and curiosity.
Julie. The roast was made from the husband's thigh. I can see where you may have an issue with it, but I find it to be very delectable. The river down the way provided a truly wonderful cleaning spot to make sure my victims were fit for eating.
Something inside of me made my feet get up and run. I barely made it to the front door as Robert launched over the dining room table, knife in hand. I just had to get to my house where I had a car and a phone. I knew that I needed to run faster than I had ever run before. I started up the hill as my legs began to burn and my ankles felt weak. I could hear Robert coming up behind me, taunting me.
Where do you think you're going, Julie? No one can help you out here.
My legs felt like jello as I dragged myself to my front door. Keys. I don't have my keys. I left them on the table at Robert's house. At this point, Buster knew something was wrong and was barking wildly. In a moment of clarity within this storm, I remembered that I had left my bedroom window open ajar. I had to hurry. Robert was getting closer and closer to the house. I hoped that he had not realized that I was without my keys and that he could easily go back and get them. I ran around the back, slammed the window open, and slid my way in. Slamming the window shut again, I scrambled around my house in an attempt to find my phone. I looked up, and I saw Robert standing in my living room window with the most sinister grin I had ever seen someone have. It was like a demon had possessed his body. I paused in fear as he began to laugh in the most evil of ways that made my stomach turn. Phone. I have to find my phone. Robert began tapping on the glass with the knife and taunting me again. I couldn't be distracted by him or I would die, and I wasn't going to die tonight. I finally found my phone and called the cops. I don't know how or why it happened, but they got there within minutes. Robert had disappeared before they got there, and the cops never found them despite their efforts. I remember looking at Robert the whole time I was on the phone with the cops. He was absolutely deranged with a wild smile on his face. I found out later that he had been an escaped murderer suspected of cannibalism, and that he had been sentenced to a mental hospital instead of prison due to his mental instability. I broke my lease the next day and stayed with family until I could figure out what had just happened to me. I don't know what happened to Robert or the family that lived in the house down the hill. All I know is that monster of a man is still out there, watching and waiting for his next meal.